what I find interesting about this is the quality of the class. It's less than ideal in the case of linebacker.
Inside linebacker, absolutely agree.
What it sounds like is like you're going to the beer store and all they have is Utica Club.
To another edition of the Rockpile Report podcast. I am your host, Bill season ticket holder Drew Gear. That's my producer, Chris Kruger. And joining us for the next installment of our 2025 draft preview series is Mr. EJ Snyder from Bootleg Football. And we're talking linebackers. EJ, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. We get to talk about linebackers, which is the flip side of the coin of one of my favorite positions, running backs. Running backs and linebackers, kind of the yin and yang in the NFL. So I love it.
Well, it's funny you mentioned running back because, we've recorded a show with Matt Waldman focusing on the running back position, and kind of like running back, the Bills are in an interesting position when it comes to the linebacker spot for 2025. You've got starters with accolades to their name, yet that feel highly unlikely to be spending another year in a Bills uniform. And so with a team that has enough to get by at both positions, but exists inside of this Super Bowl window that our GM found a way to extend by retaining the core of that team on really market-friendly contracts, you have to have a plan at these positions because they're incredibly important. And so with that in mind, despite the multitude of positions that the Bills need, quote unquote, everybody likes to talk about the defensive line and they need an edge player. They need more defensive tackle depth. I don't know. It's entirely possible that we see the Bills utilizing draft capital in an attempt to continue building out a cost-effective linebacking core around the recently extended Terrell Bernard. Because if there's anything we've learned, Brandon Beane does not like paying multiple linebackers at once. So I love that this is the topic of the night because there is a tie. Now, EJ Snyder, Bootleg Football, also the Bear Era podcast. And it's a great show. It's a lot of fun. I mean, I think I have more fun watching it than you do recording it some weeks. I mean, is that fair?
It was certainly this last season when we started. Yes. We thought we were hitting it at just the right time. Bears got their quarterback. This is going to be fun, we thought. And then Shane Waldron pooped all over that. And so it was not fun towards the end of the season. But got to say, this offseason, we're having a lot of fun.
So Tremaine Edmonds the other day said, like, hey, the Bears are in a way, kind of got a headline of his own saying, hey, the Bears are in a win now mode. Like, we have to go do this thing. It's a completely understandable thing. Some of the moves they made, some of the money they spent, the way they're kind of setting themselves up. I get the sentiment. Tremaine Edmonds, formerly of the Buffalo Bills, goes to the Bears. I first want to ask you this before we talk about the quality of the class, and then we get into the Bills' archetype for the kind of player they might be looking for in relation to that. What has Tremaine Edmonds been for your team since arriving in Chicago?
Expensive. Yeah, he signed a huge contract to come to Chicago. As everybody knows, he's an uber athlete when he was drafted. I think we might have even talked about him the year he was drafted on this show. And he was a player that needed to develop, and he developed very, very nicely in Buffalo. He was on a program, got better every year, and sort of peaked at the right time, and therefore was a preeminent free agent signing for Ryan Poles. Ryan Poles also signed TJ Edwards at the same time, hometown kid, coming back to play for the Bears. And for the most part, TJ Edwards has outplayed Tremaine Edmonds. So it's been a little bit rough. They spent big money on two. You talked about Brandon Beane not wanting to spend money on two linebackers. The Bears spent pretty decent money on both inside linebackers, and they've both played okay. But Edmonds has not, if anything, he has regressed from his, high water mark in his last year in Buffalo. And he's played okay. He hasn't played terribly. He's played bad in stretches. He's played decent in stretches. But for the money and the hype, I don't think those have matched up to his level of play on the field. And I think he might say the same thing.
And I think his running mate there that you just mentioned, would you say that they probably differ in terms of makeup and skill set?
Yeah, absolutely. No, they're complementary linebackers for sure. And that works pretty well on most teams. And TJ's played out of his mind for his hometown team. Fell off a little bit at the end of last year, but has been very, very solid in his Bears tenure, and quite frankly, a joy to watch most weeks.
So when we talk about shifting gears, talk about the quality of the class now, because complementary players is kind of what a lot of teams go for. And that's why I thought that was interesting, kind of how that all shaped out. So now when we talk about the quality of the class, the question is always, can the supply meet the demand? Right? You can have needs as a team entering the NFL draft. A lot of times what happens to GMs, fans will do this thing in our heads where we say, hey, Brandon Beane is crazy if he doesn't take an edge player considering the class. And that's great unless 15 teams ahead of you also decide that they need edge players and D tackles. And all of a sudden the pickings get slim and you say, well, do I want a cut rate? I'm going to use pick number 30, for instance, on a guy who probably should be a second round talent and it's going to be a reach, but I need an edge. Or if you're a savvy GM, do you just say, okay, fine, then there's another position like cornerback that I could fill and have a starter or a high level player, higher level just by comparison of position, and the supply just didn't meet your demand. And at the same time, then you go through the draft and you never end up getting that player. And you say, okay, now I have work to do. Schematically, I have to come up with something. I have to try to hit that second post-draft wave of free agency and just kind of build out depth so I can try to throw bodies at this problem and see if someone can plug it. It's not a given. So what I find interesting about this is the quality of the class in this. If you're a believer of Lance Zierlein from over at NFL Network, it's less than ideal in the case of linebacker. Now, do you agree or disagree with his assessment that linebacker is one of the weaker position groups in this draft class as a whole?
Inside linebacker, absolutely agree. Got to talk to Lance a little bit while we were at the combine. And this is a class that has some players that are fun and players that have skills. But if you are looking for high-end, multi-role, sort of do-it-all linebackers, there is not a lot for you in this draft. And you better get them early because they're going to disappear pretty quickly. There's 2, maybe 3, depending on who you're talking about. And after that, you are picking players that fit roles within your defense. And that's not a bad thing necessarily, but that does not lend itself to being a very strong class or a class where you can wait and get, really good depth later on. You are sort of trying to snipe a player that will fill a role in your defense as well as possible.
What it sounds like is like you're going to the beer store and all they have is Utica Club. Ninth best.
I would say it's slightly better than UC.
The old Golden Bullets, baby. We're rocking them over here.
Based on experience for sure. But no, if I was comparing draft classes to Utica Club, boy, that's a rough one. No, I think it's slightly better than that. But yeah, it is like going to the beer store and saying, well, what I wanted was where all these empty spots are on the shelf. And there's some stuff down here in the middle that will get the job done, but I'll probably have to get, twice as many of them.
Mm-hmm. So with that, I will say that it's interesting. Linebacker, they're especially off-ball linebackers. Now, to your point, there is a difference, and there's always got to be made that distinction between guys who play more of a on-the-line Sam linebacker role and the guys who play a true off-ball middle linebacker, weak side linebacker position. Off-ball linebacker has not been a hot commodity at the top of NFL drafts for years. I went back through, I went all the way back to 2021, and I took a look and kind of looked at all the linebackers taken and then looked at their profiles and their skill sets. In 2021, there was three off-ball guys taken in the top 75. In 2022, there was 5, which seems like a land rush by comparison, because in 2023, there was only 2 off-ball linebackers drafted in the top 75. One of them was first-round pick Jack Campbell. And then nobody until Drew Sanders gets taken at pick 67. Question, if you're the Lions, do you almost maybe feel like, sheesh, I could have traded back. There was this little interest. Like, could I have traded back and maybe still gotten Jack Campbell at that point? Like, there was no interest in that kind of role.
It actually links pretty well to this year's draft class, where I believe Jack Campbell was the top linebacker in that class and was multi-role effective. And I think the Lions knew if we wait or trade back and he goes off the board, we're out of luck. Like, we can't do that with one guy. We're going to have to get a couple of different guys to do that because the player you named after him is much more of a Sam, although he played middle linebacker in college.
Yep.
He's much more the Sam archetype in terms of what he's really good at. And that's not what the Lions are looking for. They have played Campbell in the middle. He has played very well for them. And they knew if they waited, they weren't going to get him. So a lot of people jumped on him about value and said, oh, it's not where you pick middle linebacker. The answer is, if you want the top one, sure it is. If he's going to come in and start and play for years, and we're going to put a lot on him, he wears the green dot in Detroit. Like, yeah, we're going to do that right now. And it's going to be worth it to us in this draft, because if we wait, we can't get that.
Yeah, I mean, Jack Campbell, I mean, he played really well right up until December 15th, 2024. No, I don't even know if he was healthy for that game because that team just got slaughtered with injuries. I just know the Bills had a field day against that Lions defense, so that was fun. In 2024, 3 off-ball linebackers drafted in the top 75. You watch Dallas Turner come off the board, and I think it almost kind of lines up with what we might see this year, where you get this guy who's probably more edge than you'd say off-ball linebacker, and he's going to go pretty highly. And then there's going to be a kind of a dead zone where there's no linebacker activity for probably another 20, 25 picks. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, and I had Turner as an edge. I never counted him as a linebacker. Has certainly some skills, and edge is that position that it's labeled that way now. And for me, it is the old sort of strong side linebacker mix of you got to do some coverage, you got to do some rushing. And I differentiate between those players out there between defensive end and edge. And I know that makes a lot of people crazy, but my rule is if you're over 260 pounds and you have less than one coverage snap per game on average, you are a DE. You are not an edge. You don't have multi-role skills. You are rushing and setting the edge. That is what you're doing. And that's fine, but I'm going to grade you against all the other guys that are doing that. And I'm not going to put you with super dynamic athletes like Dallas Turner, who are 5 and 10 and sometimes 25 yards down the field covering people and doing it pretty well, because in my mind, that's not the same thing.
Nope. And that's why I think trying to have that edge player, quote unquote, conversation with people gets murky, because people go to, casual fans go to PFF and say, hey, well, I looked at the edge rankings and this player did this and that player did that, and he's rated higher. And I go, whoa, but they're not even the same athlete. You tried to, if you were trying to compare a Greg Rousseau to a Joe Tryon or an Odafe, one of those guys, they're two completely different skill sets. And so to try to grade them apples to apples is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But people will do, the heart wants what the heart wants. People do what they want to do. I will say that given the makeup of the class, even though it's not as heralded, given the way the Bills have treated this and the way that they've been able to find real value drafting later in drafts, this dynamic that it's not exactly top heavy with off-ball linebacker talent almost might play to their advantage a little bit if that's what they want to do. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, if they see a player, and I'm sure they do, I'm sure the Bills scouting staff has gone through this inside linebacker class and picked out a couple of guys that are, in their mind, Bills, right? The Bills fit, the Bills archetype. They're going to fit this role in the defense. They're going to do these jobs that we need done in McDermott's defense. And, they had those guys tagged, and they're not going to have to race to the podium to go get them, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's a bunch of them. And again, what the Bills want isn't necessarily what the Seahawks want or, the Chargers want or whatever else. So there's not going to be, to use your turn of phrase from earlier, a land rush for a bunch of these guys. And there's probably going to be multiple steps or tiers where they can get a guy to fill that role and not have to use top end draft capital to do it.
So as we dig into archetype, first of all, Ironweed whiskey from Albany. It's listener of ours, Ryan Rhodes. It's his whiskey. So
very nice.
As I pour this up, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to send you guys out a bottle of this.
Ooh.
So you guys can take a look at that. Maybe give us your thoughts just so we can give that feedback to our friend Ryan just to see what
we'd be happy to. We scout whiskeys just like we scout players.
It's distilled and bottled by the Albany Distilling Company in Albany, New York.
Awesome.
So, archetype. You talk about linebackers. The question becomes, what do the Bills need, right? And I got to say that in years past, I've been disappointed by some of the guys they've passed on because I didn't understand what they're looking for. Leo Chenal, famously, I threw a tantrum when the Bills didn't go get Leo Chenal. And that's because we were coming out of this era where we kept having A.J. Klein find his way back onto the Bills roster. Yeah. And I go, okay, well, if you need this guy, here's a cheap version. Go get that guy. And then they wouldn't do it. And it would drive me insane where I'm like, okay, you've had multiple cracks at this type of player. Why aren't you taking because you don't really want that player. This is a necessity, not what you schematically want. And we got to see the first taste of that when they had the opportunity where you had a Tremaine Edmonds and a Matt Milano who were both coming up for free agency. And they had to pick, do we want this guy who's a physical freak? He's long and he's huge and he's got this hyper athleticism for a guy his size. And then you've got this smaller player who attacks the line of scrimmage really instinctually from depth because he's such a good athlete and he's just so cerebral in the way that he sees the field and the way he processes the line of scrimmage from depth. And it always puts him in the right place at the right time to make the play that he needs to make. And they chose to go with the smaller, less heralded athlete and let the ultra athlete walk and end up on your Bears for a premium price tag. And we paid Matt Milano $41 million. And he went on to be an all-pro. And then, but then, that next period where we were like, okay, well, who's our middle linebacker? Chris and I famously sat here and absolutely trashed Brandon Beane when he came onto the podium, after the draft and said, or after free agency and said, we didn't spend any money, even though that there was names out there being signed for $1 million, 1.5. We're comfortable with what we have in the room. And you look at the roster and I go, Balen Spector, not your physical skill set to man what I think would man middle linebacker. Terrell Bernard's a weak side linebacker. Why the hell would you consider putting two small guys on the field together? And that's exactly what they did. And it worked. Not only did it work, but
for the few times it did.
Yeah, for the handful of times they actually got to play together. It was the idea that they had identified that smaller pursuit style linebackers was what fit their scheme overall the best. And they didn't need the hulking guy in the center of the field, your traditional big tough guy middle linebacker. They just needed smaller, more athletic guys who still had some attitude and a willingness to stick their face in the fan. Even if it's Derrick Henry and they know they're outmatched, they still have to have the chutzpah to get in there. And that has paid dividends because then they've doubled down and they've brought in a Dorian Williams who, there's a play last year where he's chasing Jonathan Taylor down the sideline. He prevents a touchdown because Jonathan Taylor's running at 22 miles an hour and Dorian Williams is running at 21.5 and he catches him because Jonathan Taylor thinks there's nobody out here who can touch me. And so with that in mind, they've seemed to have identified not only what they want, but how to scout it. For something like that, when you're talking about these really athletic pursuit style linebackers, how does this class stack up in your eyes?
I think there are linebackers that fit that in this class. And the value question, you're going to come back to this, or we're going to come back to this over and over again this year, is very different than it has been in years past. Everybody likes to say this is a bad draft class. I don't think this is a bad draft class at all. I think it's a very different draft class for sure. There are less first round grades. There's a much wider middle in this class of what I would call largely even grades that stretches probably from the top third of the first round all the way to like round 4 or 5. And that sounds crazy, but when you look at lots of analysts, you mentioned Lance Erline earlier, you look at Dane Brugler and DJ and everybody else, everybody says, man, there's some guys that you think are going to go in the fourth that are going to go in the second. There's some guys you think are going to go in the third that are going to go in the fifth. And it's because of the eye of the beholder thing for the team. So there are those linebackers in this draft. Where they go and how they're valued, I don't want to have to throw that dart. But in terms of guys in this class that I think fit that, let's just call it Bills type, I think Chris Paul from Ole Miss is definitely one of them. Your own guy from Buffalo, Shaun Dolac, is one of them. He's going to be a little bit farther down. Carson Schlesinger from UCLA would be great. He's probably going to go higher than the Bills and Bean want to spend a pick, but he would be a really good fit. If you were looking to dump top draft capital, which again, we know from the Bills, they don't want to do, Demetrius Knight Jr. would be awesome in that role, but they're probably going to go quote unquote further down. How much further down that is or how long they can wait is going to see how this board shakes out. Again, I don't think there's going to be a line at the podium waiting for these inside linebackers. So I think they're going to be able to wait till the fourth or the fifth and go pick up a guy like Teddy Buchanan, or if they like Cody Simon from Ohio State. Like, these are guys that fit their type. They're a little shorter, a little faster. They definitely want to stick their nose in there. They have some limitations in their scouting reports, so they're not going to be first round picks. They're not going to be second round picks. Most of these guys aren't going to be third round picks. Chris Paul probably will be up in that range. Carson Schlesinger definitely will. I think Demetrius Knight will be in the third round range, but everybody else I mentioned, they could be available in the fifth. They might be available in the sixth, depending on how the league views them. The Bills will come in like they always do, scoop one of those guys up, and everybody will be like, "Oh, I shouldn't have waited. They should have got one of those other guys that was more talented." They'll put him in the system for 2 years, play some backup, and then it'll come time for him to get snaps. And lo and behold, he'll be damn good in that system again because they know how to scout him.
God, you're giving me all kinds of hope over here.
Sorry.
You know what's not is the fact that I reached into the fridge and found a Jenny Cream ale, and now I'm obligated to drink it.
Are you? Is that the rule?
Yeah, I think that's the rule. I mean, if you find a rogue cream ale floating around, it's
that's
like
a gift for the neighbors right there. Look what I found. It's cold.
So I want to pivot here and talk a little bit about some specific prospects that I'm just really curious about. Guys that I know, some of them you focused on, some of which I'm going to, we'll talk about it when we get there. First of all, a guy who, I'm sure when Sean McDermott saw his name on scouting reports, he kind of quietly to himself went, hell yeah. Jahad Campbell. Jahad Campbell. He's an Sam linebacker / edge player out of Alabama. Probably the top linebacker in the class. Agreed?
Yes.
Okay.
Very much so agreed.
If Buffalo is looking to be aggressive in helping their front seven, which is something that they said that they plan to do, was pursue aggressive upgrades to the front seven and also to augment the pass rush, then it almost feels like they would have to trade up. Like 30 is going to be way too low for a Jahad Campbell. They're going to have to probably, what would you say, like 20s, early teen or like late teens to try to obtain a player like this?
Again, he shares the surname with Jack Campbell, and the way we talked about Jack Campbell earlier is appropriate for Jahad Campbell because he is the one. He is Neo in this draft if you're an inside linebacker. He is the only guy that is fully multi-role functional. He was recruited as an edge player to Alabama, ended up playing more middle linebacker. Physically tremendously gifted, has some pass rush so you can scoot him up on the line at third down and, again, augment that pass rush with him in a wide nine. That's fully within his skill set. And there's not very many guys in this inside linebacker class, if any, that can do that like he can. So you would have to spend top draft capital, but again, it only takes one team, right? One team at like 15 could go, well, if we don't get Jahad Campbell, we're not getting that guy. So, it's that or nothing, and they spend the pick, which you're going to see, I would say, be more likely this year because after about the first, some people say 10, I say 5, the draft board's wide open and people are just going to try and get good football players.
And if there's a unique talent out there, it seems like there could be a team that says, you know what? Because there's not a team like not every team is wired like Buffalo. And I try to talk to my fellow Bills fans about this idea that you're going to have football teams like the Raiders, who it's like, I don't know what we are. We can't get a quarterback prospect. We just don't like this class. We just want good football players. So then whatever we do at our pick, you might call it a reach, but we don't care what you think. I, as a GM, don't give a shit what you fans think. I want good football players, and they might decide, Jahad Campbell, you know what? He's a unique football player that makes us better from the jump. And so that's going to be our pick. And you just have to accept that.
Yeah, it's possible. I don't think he'll probably last till Buffalo's pick naturally, but he could last to 25 pretty easily, like without any kind of outside influence. Because again, all these decisions are going to be made, and people might just say, hey, he's a really good football player, but he's not one we need, or we don't think that we could use him the way that would be best, and there's another talent here that we need more, whatever those conversations are. So he could get close to where the Bills are, to where a trade up is not that big of a deal, because trade ups aren't going to be at full value this year either, because not that many people are going to want to be trading up, because there again is this wide middle, fairly equal talent class in this draft. So the incentive to go up is not huge. And if anybody wants to go down for the same reason, like, hey, I can go back 10 spots and get the same guy I'm after now, they're going to have to trade for at most probably like 70 cents on the dollar.
Yep.
Right. Might be 40 cents on the dollar. Might be like, look, we'll go back, 4 or 5 spots in the first round. We'll give you a low 4th rounder, which is typically below value, but you'd take it, because why not? If they think they can go down and get the same guy, and you think you can go up those 5 or 6 spots and get a player that's going to impact your defense like Jahad Campbell, then it kind of works for both sides. And that's what has to happen for any trade, which I think a lot of fan bases, you were talking about talking to your fellow fans, and a lot of fan bases forget that, oh yeah, we want to go up or we want to go down. Well, who's going up or down with you? Because they have to want the opposite of what you want at the same amount, like an equal amount, to be able to do that trade. So that's why trades are difficult. It's not going to be impossible down in that range. And if he floats into, I would say, the high to mid 20s, I would expect some due diligence. I would expect Brandon Beane to pick up the phone and say, yeah, what would it take to get up there? If he likes it, maybe. But again, typically they have picked their linebacker talent a lot farther down.
So first of all, I'm taking a sip of this Jenny Cream Ale, and it says brewed for generations on the can. And I'm pretty sure like brewed for generations, I think, could mean multiple things here. Like, it was brewed for a generation that has already died. Like, these people are long gone. They no longer exist. Yes, it was brewed for that generation. Also, I couldn't help but think when you were talking about trading for 70 cents on the dollar, I'm like, so what you're saying is it's like me trading a PBR for a Utica club. There's just like, hey, both. And then also, I just want to ask, in terms of some of the weaknesses in Jahad Campbell's game, because he's not a perfect prospect by any stretch. No. If he was, he would be a top 5 pick. What about the assessment? I've watched a lot of Alabama football, and I can say that I've watched plays where this has crossed my mind, that in sometimes his athleticism makes up for just a lack of instinct, or that his instinct sometimes fails him in certain critical moments.
I wouldn't say it fails him necessarily. I would say it's not fully developed. It's not terrible. I've heard a lot of people say he has no instincts and he's all athlete. And I'm like, there's a lot of plays on tape that show, good instincts and anticipation as well as great athleticism. There are also the plays you mentioned on tape that show really great athleticism and not really knowing what to do with it. And that's being young in the position. I think that would work out, but those are the kind of things that you're going to get to learn when you sit down with him, put him on the board, see how, he talks about those plays, how he self-assessed after those plays. Did he make the same mistake later in the season, or did he fix it? Those are the kind of things that you're going to get from really sitting down with the player and saying, no, I think, because look, especially the Bills, Edmonds was an absolute rocket coming out of college, but that rocket was not always pointed in the right direction, for sure. And they got it. So it was. So they know how to do this. And if they believe that the prospect can do that, the player can do that, has the ability to improve in that facet of their game, they'll gamble on the athleticism.
Interesting thing here. Like, Well, first of all, if you're saying like, oh yeah, people saw it on tape, I didn't have to see it on tape. I saw it in my living room as I was screaming profanity in some games where I was just like, why aren't you like, where did you go? How did you overrun that play?
The joy of college football.
It'll be interesting to see where he's valued and how he falls. I think that, again, for the average fan, we don't understand the concept, right? Like, guy is supposed to see ball, get ball. But there's so much that goes on if you've ever stood where linebackers stand and watched the play develop. You know, I used to playing offensive line when I was a little kid. The thing that used to get referred to as the wash. And it's just, you can't get caught up in the wash because you will. And most kids do. And then most high school kids who, even when they're good, they go to college and they get caught in the wash because it's all just too fast. And there's a lot there, and it'll be interesting to see whether or not some team takes a gamble on it. But one thing I was going to say, you know this firsthand, your team drafted Roquan Smith.
Mm-hmm.
The Buffalo Bills drafted Tremaine Edmonds in that same draft class. Having watched a lot of Alabama football, the difference between the two, even though Edmonds was, again, this hyper athlete, Roquan Smith had it between the ears where Edmonds hadn't developed that yet. And it was the difference in the careers. Roquan Smith, multi-time Pro Bowl talent, and Tremaine Edmonds, who really had to work to put that together. And now you're seeing the other side of it after they trade away Roquan to the Ravens, and then they bring in Edmonds in free agency. And having watched, apples to apples, try to compare them playing that same position, it's still not the same.
No, it's not. And it is one of the positions. Inside linebacker and safety are really the two positions I think of on defense that having it between the ears, however you want to call that, great play recognition, great study habits. People call it instincts. A lot of times I think instincts gets confused with works really hard, studies a lot, understands keys and tendencies. Like a lot gets, talk about in the wash, a lot of things get put in the bowl and spun around and called instincts. But being quick mentally on a football field will help you make up a lot playing inside linebacker or safety, either one, because you got a lot of ground to cover, and the quicker you can click in and understand what you're seeing in front of you, the faster you can start moving and putting whatever speed you have to use. And we see this all the time with players who are slower, time skill, getting to plays more quickly because they identified them more quickly, triggered more quickly, and started running before the other person had figured it out, despite the fact that that person is faster.
So I don't want to spoil the surprise, but you guys recently recorded a show over on Bootleg Football about 10 draft gems on offense and defense. And this is one of the things I love about your productions and the things that you guys come up with and the conversations that you guys have and the way it's all produced. It's amazing because you get to, you have players that you didn't know about, that you get to learn so much more about. And it's just like you guys kind of cherry picking a player who you go, hey, you might not have heard about this guy, or maybe you did, but either you have heard of him, but his value is going to be so much more than what everyone consensus kind of thinks it is. Or here's a guy that across the country, a lot of people don't even know exists, and he is going to at least be a fun player to watch. And I go back to fun because you had a dissertation on Shaun Dolac, linebacker out of the University of Buffalo, that like it got me excited and sent me back to go watch more highlights. And I was like, you're spot on. Can we talk about Shaun Dolac for a second?
Of course.
What do you think about
Shaun Dolac?
This guy?
Is super fun to talk about. And, University of Buffalo linebacker who, again, the reason I found him was a listener reached out to me in the summer and said, hey, have you heard of this guy? I said, no, I haven't. He said, put him on your list. I said, okay. So that's the mode I'm in summer when we're doing our team previews, is just making lists. That's all I'm doing. So I just put his name on a list. Well, fast forward 4 or 5 months, and I was in the middle of scouting a bunch of other players. And I don't think people realize when you scout, as many players as we do, anywhere between 150 to 250 players, you kind of hit runs where you watch 3 or 4 duds in a row, and it's just not very exciting. And it's hard. That's the drudge work of scouting, is that not everybody's fun. Not everybody's great. Not everybody has awesome beautiful stats to look at, right? So I needed a boost, and when I need a boost, I go for wild cards that I'm not super familiar with, or maybe somebody that I really trust said, "Yeah, you're going to like this person." And I sort of picked Shaun out of the hat off the list, and I was like, "All right, I'll watch this guy. I have no idea what to expect. I had no idea who he was." And I'm 3 minutes into his tape, and I'm like, "Holy crap! Like, this guy can play football. Like, this guy can really play football. Okay, maybe it was just a good game." You keep going through the highlights, and you're like, "Nope, nope, this guy can play football," and nobody knows his name. And he's not the biggest. And again, he fits that Bills mold. He's 6'1", 225. He is hyper productive, 125 tackles, super low missed tackle rate, 5%. For a middle linebacker, it's about half what I would consider a pretty good average. And with that many tackles, pretty unheard of. Almost 500 coverage snaps, 484, was only targeted 58 times. Just a player that does everything all over the field, has impact, is one of those guys that, you talked about Bills linebackers. You need that ability to stick your hat in there and make a difference. He's going to do that every down, every game. Got great hands. I honestly think he can play tight end. Like, he has 5 interceptions, and sometimes you're like, okay, middle linebacker, 5 interceptions. These are tip balls from the defensive line. These are things that bounced off tight ends' helmets, and he got them. 4 out of the 5 for him are hands catches where he's undercutting the route. Like, he's running the route for the receiver.
He's got
and
it underscores his instincts. I don't
fully believe that.
I guys, go back, and I want you to go watch the 10 Draft Gems show from Bootleg Football. Go watch it tonight. Just get all of VJ's thoughts on just the makeup of this player, because he just seems incredibly fun. And here locally, you've heard so much about him for the entire football season this year. And then you take a look at where the Buffalo Bills are as a franchise, because last summer, Buffalo Joe Anderson was one of the best stories of the 2024 preseason. And then you take a look back at the roster and you go, well, wait a minute. We already have 3 UB players on the roster. We've got Cam Lewis, Jamarcus Ingram, and Joe Anderson. Joe Anderson, special teams player. Cam Lewis, after 3, I think, Chris, maybe 4 years on the roster, he's now getting significant snaps. He's a primary backup at both safety and nickel corner. He plays a lot of dime, which he rotates in with Jamarcus Ingram, depending on the makeup of our opponent. If you need a guy, Cam Lewis is the guy that they think they trust more because he has a more well-rounded skill set. Jamarcus Ingram is long and he's physical. And so if they need that from their dime roll that week, they'll activate him and bring him onto the field. And so in this way, they've found a way to get UB products onto the NFL field and have them actually making an impact week after week after week. But it's not just UB. You take a look at some of the other smaller school products, Teron Johnson. Teron Johnson didn't go to a major name Power 5 school, and he's one of the preeminent talents at nickel corner in the entire NFL. The Bills allowed that to take place. They took a gamble on a kid from a smaller school whose skill set seemed to fit what they were looking for. And so with that in mind, there was one stat that I do want to crib from your podcast. And again, this is why you go and you tune into these guys and you listen to this stuff. He has 76 run stops in 2024.
So absurd.
Jeffrey Bossa, who's talked about as a better player, only had 3 tackles for a loss to Dolac's 24 tackles for loss.
Yeah, when you're looking at that particular stat, and I was doing work on safeties before we started recording this today. I'm working through the sort of mid to lower tier safeties now. And, safeties are all over the board, a little bit like linebackers, right? You can have linebackers that are primarily guys that go forward. You can have linebackers that are primarily coverage. And when you look at the mix between their tackling stats, specifically these, and their coverage stats, you kind of get a sense for the player before you watch them. Hey, this is what they're good at, or this is how they're primarily utilized. A lot of these safeties, they've got the good ones have like 20 or 30. These are box safeties who are part of the run fit, who are often run blitzing. Those are the best safeties in this class. There are a few that stick out more than that, but a lot of linebackers, especially coverage linebackers, anybody that might have 5 interceptions, they might have 5, 8, 10 stops like for the year. He had games with 13, which is, I don't even know how that's real, but it is. And when you watch the tape, you go, oh, that's how that's real. He triggers really well. He's a great spy on mobile quarterbacks. He mirrors very well. He's got a ton of skills. He's a great player.
It's one of those things where when you're talking about these statistics and how people see them and where guys stack up, and it's like Brett is always tweeting. In fact, I was joking the other day with him that he's the only person I've ever seen who can ratio Chris Sims. He's the only person I know who can go on Twitter and ratio Chris Sims when he's talking about putting Shamar Turner as like his number 2 pass rusher. And he goes, hey, and he just tweets out, taps the sign. And it's his tweet from a month ago where it's from Moneyball. And he goes, hey, if he's a good pass rusher, why doesn't he rush the passer good? If Shaun, this is the inverse of that. You can tell me that Shaun Dolac, small school product and this, that, the other thing. And he's a linebacker, but he's so. He has a great pro day. He just has a phenomenal pro day. And also when you look at his production, you go, if he's not a good linebacker, why is he putting up crazy linebacker statistics?
Yeah, why does he linebacker so good?
Why does he linebacker so good if he's not a good linebacker?
Well, the one I coined a couple of years ago was very linebackery. That's my adjective. Shaun Dolac is extremely linebackery.
So I look at him as this kind of raw-ish block of clay that you could give a guy like Bobby Babich, who has overseen the development of a Matt Milano and overseen the Terrell Bernard and the Dorian Williams, and put him in a camp with him and let him run and let him figure out what the NFL speed is like and see if there's anything Bobby Babich can do with that guy. Like, it seems like there's a lot there for a team like the Buffalo Bills to work with.
I would completely agree. And a lot of people, like you said, when they see small school, they go, well, he must be terribly undersized. And look, 6'1", 225 doesn't sound big, but that's actually fairly mid-sized for middle linebackers these days. Middle linebackers have shrunk. The days of 6'4", 255 as a middle linebacker, you don't see that. That's an edge now, or a defensive end in certain cases. And maybe not even that. There we have defensive ends that are 6 foot and 245, right? So 6'1", 225 is perfectly sized, even for the NFL. And then a lot of people would say, well, small school he must be slow, right? He must run like 4.78 or 4.85 or something, which is a lot of times what happens. You get to the pro day circuit and somebody's hyping up, small school running back, small school linebacker. You go and the guy ran a 4.87 as a running back. And you're like, well, we're done. Like, forget it. It's not happening. I don't care how shifty he is or how tough he is. Like, that's too slow. Shaun Dolac ran a 4.55. He ran a 4.55 40. That is well fast enough. That is faster than a lot of middle linebackers that play. And he runs funny, right? He's a little bit kind of duck-footed. He doesn't look like the most graceful athlete, but he gets there on the field. And when he gets there, he brings his pads with him. He delivers impact, which is, agile, mobile, hostile. You need all three to be a linebacker. He's got all three. He delivers. I think he's a great player, and I think he's a perfect fit for the Bills.
And then I was going to ask about Teddy Buchanan, just because he's a small, athletic guy. It almost strikes me a lot like what when I read all the draft write-ups everyone's done, and I try to look at like 5 or 6 of them and say, okay, what are the common threads? This guy has a unique approach, or do I see anything that keeps popping up between all these different people's point of view of a player, which helps you gain a truest, it's almost like if you were trying to take Fox News and CNN and go somewhere in the middle here is probably a closer look at the truth. I just keep thinking to myself, we're here talking about these late round picks and guys who are going to be middle to late round guys. Last year, we had a great clip of you talking up Eddie Ulofoshio out of Washington, who you got a chance to see a lot in person and really kind of scout up close and personal. And so we have that audio of you talking about him on our show last year and really talking him up as like hey, if you just want a coverage guy. I guess my question would be, if you think about guys like Teddy Buchanan, Shaun Dolac, when you talk about that tier of player where you're going to get really good value, and especially if you're a team that can coach that linebacker position and that's your team's defensive archetype, where would an Eddie Ulofoshio who's already on the Bills roster slot in if he was part of this year's draft class?
It's a great question. I went back and looked, and luckily you prepped me for this question because, when you're dealing with 350 players this year and 350 players last year, a bunch of the short term gets flushed out. But no, Ufosho is a really fun player that I liked and thought was being underrated. He'd had injury concerns. He lost almost 2 full seasons to injury in college. So a lot of people had kind of forgotten about him, but then he just came on like gangbusters his final collegiate season. He had a ton of production, a ton of tackles, a bunch of forced fumbles, a bunch of interceptions. Ended up as a finalist for National Linebacker Award, and people still kind of went, there's just lots we don't like. He was in the 3rd tier of linebackers for me last year. He would be about the 3rd tier of linebackers for me this year, but I actually think the tiers were a little bit more talented. Tiers for me are just where there's a break in talent. So in this year, Jihad Campbell is in a tier of his own. He's in the 1st tier. Then there's a break to the 2nd tier. There's 3 or 4 guys there. And then there's another break, and so on and so forth. So Ufosho would be in that 2nd to 3rd tier. I think last year's tier comparatively was a little bit more skilled than this one. But that would put him in the range this year of right above like where Teddy Buchanan is. We just talked about Teddy Buchanan from Cal. Who came onto my radar last year because he was playing at UC Davis, and somebody said, have you seen this UC Davis linebacker? And I was like, well, no, but I'll take a look. Of
course I haven't seen a UC Davis linebacker.
Is he Shaun Dolac, right? Does he have 125 tackles? And most don't. And so, but then he transferred. And so when I scouted, I was like, and his first name's got a unique spelling. And I was like, wait a minute. Oh, this is the kid from UC Davis. Got it. Okay. But this year, that 3rd tier is guys like Smail Mondon from Georgia, who is a very specific type of linebacker. And if you need a tight end eraser, it's funny you were talking about the Bills player with length. If they need length in their gameplay, if you need length in your inside linebacker room, go get Smail Mondon. He's a tight end eraser. Just drape him over your opposing tight end all week, and you'll be fine. Barrett Carter from Clemson, and then Danny Stutzman, who is an absolute heat-seeking missile. He's good for 2 downs, and he's really, really good for 2 downs. He's that guy in every high school or college football movie ever made that's out headbutting cars in the parking lot before the game. He's that guy, but he's really good at it. He's got a great trigger, great eye, but he's completely hopeless in coverage. It's not that he can't physically, it's that he just hasn't had to do it. So he kind of looks like one of those guys that's like looking for his spot on the ground that they, made the X chalk mark for.
So it's like the day that I did. Find it. Like there was a day in slow pitch softball where I got pissed off. Now, mind you, I'm a catcher and a right fielder in slow pitch softball. And I demanded, I was like, you all suck. I'm playing first base.
Oh boy.
I haven't played infield ever. Not ever in my entire life. Not little league baseball, nowhere.
Wow.
But I demanded first base because I just was like, this guy sucks. You all suck. I'm going to go out there and do it. And since I was kind of running the team, no one argued with me. First ball comes. It's a dribbler down the 3rd baseline. It's an easy throw and catch. And I step on the bag and I'm like, see, assholes, it's not that hard.
Uh-oh.
And then the second one comes and it's down the 1st baseline and I scoop and I run over and I tag the base and now I'm all full of myself. I'm like, yeah, see, you guys suck. I'm great. This is amazing. Next batter comes up and he smokes one down the 3rd baseline. Our 3rd baseman comes up, but he comes up hot and this guy's got wheels and he's coming. And so our 3rd baseman smokes one from the corner to first base. I'm trying to keep my foot on the bag because I'm not an idiot. I understand I have to be able to pick this off. But I've already committed because my instincts are terrible. I've never done this before. And he throws the ball and I'm leaning to where I think the ball's going to land. And I see that thing start to move in the air. And I go, oh, shit. I'm already overextended. I can't get to the ball. So EJ, in all my infinite wisdom, what I do is I say, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to barehand the ball into my glove because that's a good way to do things.
Nope.
I got it, and I shattered my index finger in the process.
Oh, yeah.
The game wasn't over. So now I have to go up and bat, and I have to hold the bat like this. And I'm
it
up
looks
there.
like you're pointing at the pitcher. Now he's excited.
Oh my God. And everyone kept going, hey, Drew, what number are you? Hey, Drew, oh, you're the best. And it was a long couple days. Broken finger, had to splint it. It was a
Yep. Instincts will get you pretty far in just about any sport.
And if you don't have the instincts, you can find yourself in a heap of trouble really quickly.
Yeah, it's funny because Danny Stutzman's instincts going forward are art. I mean, if you want to put on classical music and watch Danny Stutzman stuff the run, like I could do that for hours, drinking bad beer or not. Like it is gorgeous. Watching Danny Stutzman in coverage is like the record scratch in a movie. You're like, nope, stop. We don't want that. The other thing was good, pleasant. This is unpleasant. But again, these are role players. And the reason I have Stutzman where I have him this year is because I've learned my lesson. There's always that player in the draft class. There was Denzel Perryman, right? I was like, oh man, he's a hammer. He's only good for 2 downs. These guys go on to play in the league for 10 years each.
Yep.
Which is a long time. And so I have stopped downgrading that skill set just because they can't cover, because teams out there need them and employ them year after year, pay them as free agents. And Stutzman is a good athlete who has got a great trigger against the run. He's going to make money in the NFL for a long time, whether I like it or not. So, yeah.
I love it. I appreciate you coming and talking us through the linebacker position and kind of giving us some perspective on the value of not only what's out there, but also what we already have on the roster in Ulofoshio. Like, if the Bills do decide, hey, we need a coverage linebacker, a weak side linebacker, Ulofoshio, there's nothing saying he can't step into that role with a little more seasoning and a little more opportunity. The problem is he's firmly behind Dorian Williams at the pecking order. And some of that comes down to, what did you say? You got to have all three? Right? The
agile, mobile, hostile. Yeah, for sure.
Dorian Williams checks all those boxes to the nth degree, more so than Ulofoshio did. And that's why Ulofoshio is not getting that opportunity. Maybe with a little seasoning, he can get there. But even so, to have him as a backup plan is not the worst thing in the world. And then you go into this draft with an opportunity to add another body, like God help us all. If it's Dolac, there's going to be a party going on down here in the studio.
It's going to be the best. It's going to be so good. If that happens, we will be just mentally communing on the same wavelength on that particular moment.
I love it. I appreciate you joining us. Why don't you tell everybody what you have still in the chamber for the rest of the month as far as draft coverage and where they can find all your stuff?
Yeah, Bootleg Football on YouTube. Easiest way to find all of our stuff. That's interviews with players. We have 2 more of those coming out, I think, that we filmed at the Shrine Bowl before the draft. We've got 2 more guests, I believe. We've got JT O'Sullivan, who's coming out very soon. We just released Matt Miller. We've got 1 more guest after that. And then we've got lots of extra stuff on the Bootleg Football Patreon this year. We're doing bonus episodes for all of our subscribers that kind of back up all these episodes and talk about some of these players like this farther on down the board. So if you're really into draft stuff, go become a member of the Bootleg Football Patreon, because there's a lot more content for you right there.
Guys, this has been a lot of fun. I'm very appreciative to EJ for taking time out of his schedule to come join us. But for tonight, we're going to get the hell out of here. I'm Drew Gear. That's Chris Kruger. That's EJ Snyder. And this has been your Rock Pile Report.